Thank you very much for coming to CPHI and coming to this breakout session this morning. During this panel discussion, we will be talking about pricing and affordability, creating a sustainable market. Now, what we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years that there's a wave or a couple of waves of new, expensive, innovative treatments that are coming to the market, which have a very high impact on the overall pharmaceutical budget. And this is also reflecting on prices, sustainability of the off-patent industry, and that's what we are going to be talking about today with this distinguished panel. So let me just quickly introduce them from left to right. So we have Ángel Luis, forgot your last name, Rodriguez de la Guerda, a man with a lot of experience in the pharmaceutical industry and many years now already as Director General of the ISEC, which is the Spanish Association for Generic and Biosimilar Medicines. We have in the middle Aurelia Arias, also a guy with a lot of many years of experience and now working as a senior consultant with IQVIA. Then on the right for you, Victor Mendonça, a man as well with a lot of years of experience.
Just started.
Now head of policy and market access Europe with Mylan. So Aurelio is going to give an opening presentation, and following on that, we hope to open the panel discussion and the discussion with the audience as well. So Aurelio.
¿Tiene presentación?
Okay. Oh, you're okay there. Creo que están bien. All right, everyone hear me okay? Okay, thank you. So, I'd just like to start off with really reflecting on why we're here in the first place, okay? And really talking about the generics market and how it benefits all stakeholders that take part of it. So if I start with the payers and the policymakers, it's for them about creating a system where we can get medicines to as many people as possible that they are in charge of in the cheapest way possible for them. Okay, so getting this this value across everyone. So generics market very important for them from an economic reason and from a policy point of view to actually get these medicines out. For manufacturers, and not just generic manufacturers. So obviously there's that incentive there for generic manufacturers to actually exist, to be able to get a return on investment and grow to provide these medicines. But also the system, for it to function properly, for the whole idea of having patents and loss of exclusivity for innovators, we really need an efficient generics market, because innovators need this impetus to actually innovate, okay? So there's that benefit for the innovators as well as the generic manufacturers. For providers, if I'm a healthcare provider, if I'm a physician, for example, I want to be able to prescribe a wide range of medicines, and to be able to do that, we also have to make sure that there is an adequate supply of medicines, that there is an adequate range of medicines to be able to do that. But lastly, and most importantly, it's all really all down to the patients, okay? So having a healthy and sustainable generics market is about making sure that all patients can have as much access to these medicines in the right quantity for, across the globe, really, for all players involved. So I'm going to go into a few numbers here, and this is really showing the type of savings. So this efficiency. This slide's a little bit old, but the numbers still hold true today. What we've done here is we've taken the essential saving at a list price level for once you get the loss of exclusivity, once you get the generic medicine into the market, what's the saving that you get? So we see around 70% on the high end and potentially around 60% on the lower end there in terms of this efficiency of getting generics into a country. Now, what we've attempted to do down here is say, if we had 100% generic usage, where would our savings be? And roughly that pushes down to about 80%. But already that's not bad, okay? So we see that obviously having a healthy generics market does instantly produce some strong results for the payers. And then on another positive note as well, that there is still plenty of room to operate in. We see countries like the USA and China potentially at about a saturation in terms of medicine usage. So when people say 9 out of 10 drugs that are consumed in the US are actually generic, this is what they mean. Over here we have the volume of medicines consumed by the healthcare, by the US system, and that's around 86% is actually generics, and that's climbed 6% in the last 5 years. Places like China, we've had a slight decline, but broadly overall, and Japan, that's got a large spike there due to them trying to play sort of catch up with the rest of developed markets, implementing new policies and so on. But I think what we can see here, and there are various reasons why countries such as Spain and Italy, France and so on, have yet to reach potentially these levels of UK and Germany in terms of generic utilization. But there is still some efficiency there that can be gained. Okay, there is still potential there that we can see just by comparing across other countries. And here is, I think, where we're talking about some of the challenges, primarily the volume and price, which we'll go into. But to start off with volume, we're seeing volumes decrease, and we're seeing them decrease not only in developed markets where we would be, I guess, expecting some decrease in volume, but actually and also in some of the emerging markets as well. We're starting to see a decrease in volume, which to us is quite worrying looking to the future, as we've seen generic companies use emerging markets as a way to grow their share, as a way of growing volume. Once you start getting a volume depression, what does that leave us? Well, we can start, I guess, increasing the price, or we can start looking towards a more sort of value play. So just taking a quick glance at prices. And pricing is in the news a lot recently. A lot of it's to do with healthcare systems attempting to drive down their overall budget in order to afford some of these novel technologies that are coming out on the market. The cell and gene therapies out there are not cheap. And one of the ways that they're trying to ensure that their budgets are kept low is to lower prices across the board. Now, of course, once you start lowering prices for generics, a sector that's already running on quite thin margins, you're really getting squeezed there. So on the left here, we have US generics that since actually just the sort of beginning of last year, sort of end of 2016, we saw for the first time that generics produced a negative growth in the US, okay? And just to clarify, that chart on the left is contribution to growth. So running up all those quarters beforehand, we saw that the generic sector was actually contributing positively to growth, to value growth. And now we're starting to see some problems in there. And predominantly driven by the big players, Teva, Mylan and so on, with the sort of pressure that they've been under in the US has actually affected the market quite a bit. But it's not all kinds of generics. We've seen that sort of branded generics, although they've been growing slower. This is the light blue line here. Branded generics in the US, they've been growing slower. They haven't suffered as much as this sort of the unbranded pure play generics, of which we're starting to see this negative price growth. And in Europe as well, once we start to index the generics pricing growth, we also see this decline all the way. So that's sort of taken just over 10 years ago, and that's done nothing but just drop, drop, and drop. And this is, I think, the heart of the problem, is that we have a slowdown in volume, a decrease in pricing, and then it's really starting to squeeze the market, okay? And I just want to talk a little bit about crowding as well, and the number of players in these countries. Over here we have, and I appreciate this is a little bit hard to read, so I'm just going to go through what it is we have the number of generic players in these regions in the US. So we take that very left-hand side column over there. In 2008, we had 118 generic players, and these are ones that have revenues over $10 million US. 2013, that grew to 136, and 2018, that grew to 203. Okay, so we've been having a change of sort of 15% 2008 to 2013, and then it grew to nearly a 50% increase in the last 5 years of generic players in the US. That's a large number that's come in. And as we'll see, that is that increase has come predominantly from US companies. So we're starting to see international companies actually have some problems in terms of operating and growing in the US there. EU5 has also seen some growth in the number of competitors within the market, but really across the board, what we've started to see is that the number of new entrants has slowed down. Okay, so we don't see any sort of negative. So we don't see any competitors or any country seeing less players, but we're seeing a real slowdown in a lot of the regions. And what that's led to is, I'm going to start with the pie charts here on the right-hand side first. This is the share, the value share of the generic market globally in for the top 10. Okay, for the top 10 largest players. That's gone from 32% in 2012, so about 6 years ago, to about 24% now. So we're starting to see that sort of that top-heavy approach being squeezed as you get a lot of other generic players coming in, which if you're a small generic player, if you're maybe a country that's trying to boost their domestic players and trying to get them to export their medicines abroad, that's seen as a positive thing, right? We're eroding share from the big players. And it's the first time that we've seen Cipla, that blue line, actually come in, a non-US player, actually come in and dominate the top 5. I say non-US, Sandoz, Teva. So I guess non-developed country player would probably be the better term for that. And those colored lines that are sort of pointing downwards, these are the other top 5 that are actually starting to lose generics market volume. Okay, so seeing the big players starting to struggle a little bit with the drop in prices, and we're seeing some sort of smaller players able to operate in that space, predominantly from countries like India and China. What about the actual value share from domestic players? So we've been talking about, if we take a look at these regions, in the US, for example, 5 years ago, 38% of the generics market came from domestic players. Those are companies that are headquartered in the US. Now, that's about 46%. So like I mentioned before, a lot of the international players are potentially starting to find it a little bit harder to operate in the US. US companies are able to navigate some of the access and the reimbursements and so on a lot easier than international companies. But I would also like to say that we're still looking at sort of quite a low amount of domestic share there. That's still saying that 54% of the US market by value is actually from international players. In EU5, we've actually seen that this sort of crowding, this demand for value from payers, pushing down some of the pricing, actually favoring some of the international companies who can operate with a bit more of a lean, efficient model there. Japan has been unchanged, and I looked also back at 2008, sort of 5 years prior to that, so 10 years ago, that number was about 82% as well. So Japan on a real steady keel there of a high level of domestic players in that market. And same with China as well. China's been a very tough market for international players to try and move in there and take share away from some of the domestic players. We have seen that in the last sort of 5 years, the number of entrants has been larger. So just taking a look at the number of manufacturers selling in China, that's gone up. So we now have about 50-50 split between domestic manufacturers and Chinese manufacturers. But Chinese manufacturers still dominate the market. And here, I'd just like to talk a little bit about sort of purchasing power of the stakeholders. So this is just a little slide to illustrate some of the consolidation that we're seeing in terms of sort of the buyers and the people who really have access or give some of this market access, right? So pricing in the US is suffering for many reasons, but one big reason here is that we have sort of an increase in the buying power for these stakeholders due to some of the consolidation. And we're starting to see that here in Europe as well. So what are the how are these stakeholders reacting? So, we have here some of the pricing pressures that I talked about, squeezed margins as volume gets lower, overcrowding as well. And really something that I haven't yet touched upon is the overall effect from this is that it starts to bring on shortages as companies can no longer enter or operate in a market at a profitable level. So they instead decide to actually say, look, we can't produce or sell these drugs profitably. And to actually fill in that shortage gap takes longer than the market to actually become profitable. So you actually do get a real gap in the supply of medicines where it's most needed at sometimes. We have things like the Nordics have combined entities to decide to have a list of drugs that they would be having a joint purchasing agreement from. But what we've seen previously is that increasing buying power isn't necessarily, or increasing the purchaser power isn't necessarily great in terms of actually driving profitability for the companies who decide to operate in these markets. So by having a joint purchasing agreement, we have to be, they have to be very careful in how they operate to make sure that there's still incentives there for these commercial manufacturers and commercializers to provide the drugs for those Nordic markets. We've seen that the FDA has decided to publish a list of generic molecules, which wasn't really well received to fanfare, most likely because a lot of companies already knew about these medicines and had already ruled them out from being profitable, viable molecules to pursue in the first place. So they're finding it hard as well to have a tool and implement on how to actually keep this market sustainable. What we're seeing in places like Europe is that we're starting to see private equity coming in and starting to purchase some assets of the bigger companies, either huge buyouts or taking away a sort of portfolio slice from them. So private equity companies obviously notorious for trying to cut costs, strip down, become sort of lean operating model, but don't always quite get it right. So there is an element of introduced risk into that sort of operating model there. But we see that as well, in the US where we had Sandoz selling as well a huge part of its portfolio. So I think that's what we're going to start seeing more, is that these companies are going to say, okay, well, we're going to try to split out the profitable, the viable part of our generics business from that where we can't operate in a lean and efficient way, and we're just going to start selling that, okay? So that's what we're seeing for these large companies. And rather interestingly, in the US as well, that we're seeing this sort of non-profit consortium, this sort of organization that represents about 500 hospitals, where they're going to try and manufacture molecules. And I think we have about 14 drugs there currently, and they're going to try having a sort of non-profit approach to manufacturing these medicines. So imagine what that's going to do for the industry, where we have a non-profit manufacturer there. Is that really going to start, sending out the sort of the signals, that messaging that we have molecules here that are profitable, that is going to be viable for a lot of the private enterprises? Well, potentially not, but potentially that could be one of the solutions for those molecules where private manufacturers have decided to leave behind. That we get some sort of non-profit organizations that will take on that slack. So actually quite interesting, and I will be monitoring that in the coming years. So before we continue with the panel discussion, I think I just want to sort of summarize and have that in your head here. So there will be sort of more hurdles to raising prices, okay, in the coming years. There's going to be overcrowding. There's going to be payers demanding extra value. Buying power is going to increase as consolidation from the purchasers increases in that. Competition from countries like India and China will also start to become even stronger. So really, if you come from a large multinational company, you have to make sure that you are running quite an efficient operating model, because if you don't, these guys will. Okay? And one of the short-term ways that we're seeing companies actually responding to this increase in competition, increase in crowding is to actually start to sell off its assets. And I think we're going to start seeing that. And that's sort of a short-term solution as companies have quite a strong reaction to that. Okay, so I'd just like you to keep that in mind while we have this discussion. And also remember that it's all about increasing access to medicines for the patient. Okay, so I'd just like to drive that through for the upcoming panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aurelio. Thank you. I have to wait for my microphone because there's a lot of background noise. Thank you very much, Aurelio. So in the meantime, while you were giving your presentation, we also saw the market share of participants increasing, so that's a very good sign. We would like to have this discussion a little bit interactive with the people in the room. So if there are any questions before we move on for Aurelio, now is the time. Or after the other presentations as well. But please raise your hand if you have a question or comment. Over there, next to you.
Oh.
Sorry, I don't see. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yes. Just regarding the non-profit organization that is going to produce products, drugs, but isn't there a conflict of interest because they own the hospitals? So how can they produce medicine? Just wonder.
Yeah, I think there are quite a lot of unanswered questions, and this is why I find it quite interesting as well that we have this sort of consortium. Yes, there potentially is some conflict of interest there. I think Martin and I were sort of discussing some of the bigger challenges that a consortium like this might have, and we think that potentially that we see that there's going to be a lot of hurdles in terms of not only being able to manufacture these things, but also making sure that they're compliant with regulatory, with CGMP, with having the market access, having the funding needed to keep this going year on year is potentially one of the big questions. Whether you can get a non-profit model to survive manufacturing molecules to an abundant level to close off any gaps, that's still to be seen. Whether we have any sort of conflicts of interest, I think potentially. Yeah, that's definitely something that we'd also be taking a look at. But I think any sort of conflicts of interest there may hinder the process of them actually being able to get some of these medicines out in a fashion that's efficient for them. Yeah.
We had a question in the back. Please, can you state your name and affiliation?
Good morning, Sitem Biso from BSF. My question is on the number of generics that you mentioned earlier. Particularly, I want to know, is that number counting the generics sellers or manufacturers in those particular countries that you mentioned, particularly on emerging economies?
Yeah, I've used that term interchangeably, but actually, strictly speaking, that's the commercializers. So it's the commercializers. So it's companies who are actually on the ground selling these products. So you could have potentially one manufacturer serving multiple commercializers. Okay, what we're counting there are commercializers. So I may have used the term manufacturers. I'm sorry.
Okay, so there could be a duplication there. So
there definitely could be a duplication, yeah.
So,
yeah,
okay.
Correct. We are able to show manufacturers as well, and it just depends on sort of the audience and the type of people who want to have that data. I haven't run those numbers, but if you send me an email, we could do a quick, I could run those numbers if you're interested.
Right. And the presentation too.
Yes, you'll get the presentation afterwards. I think that's distributed by the people.
Maybe just a quick question from my side to... over there.
Does price evolution vary when competition diminishes? For instance, you mentioned there were regions where there were less competitors, or maybe tender models where there are so many contenders competing. Is the price evolution varying on these regions or areas?
Definitely for sort of tender models, we do see a link between a number of competitors that bidding for that tender and the final price. Okay, so I think that's clearly why we have tenders in the first place. We, in terms of the crowding and the number of players in there, does drive down competition because it does limit the available, I guess, supply, or should I say the available market in which these commercializers can supply to. So although I haven't got any numbers to show you that, we have seen that it does affect that, yeah. So crowding does affect. So conversely, at a certain price level or a certain price drop, it stops any extra manufacturers able to operate within that market. And I think that's why we've seen in the last 5 years a slowdown in the number of operators within a market, because they just can't get the numbers to tally up at the end of it.
Just maybe a final question from my side for you, Aurelio. You mentioned this, the Nordic initiative on joint purchasing on 11 molecules. I think it's Norway, Iceland, Finland, I don't know, by heart. But the reason why they're doing is because they were facing some shortages. So they, in the mindset of the payer, they were thinking, okay, these 11 molecules, the companies are not supplying them to our market anymore because they've lost profitability. The prices have gone too far. So the consideration of those three is let's try to buy them, the three of us together, so we have a larger buying power. And let's organize a tender. But wouldn't that be fighting fire with fire? And do you think that would be, is that a solution or?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's not a solution because I get proved wrong potentially, but you're right, and I think it comes down to this increasing in purchasing power. Does that align with creating a generics sustainable market if what we're trying to do is have a price that is acceptable to all stakeholders? Once you have power shifting to one side, which is potentially what we'll be seeing in the Nordics, that will essentially drive down the price. At least, that's what modern economic theory will tell us. Yet, if they do promise certain sort of volume concessions for certain price levels, if they do build a sort of an agreement that is sort of like a smart contract or a smart tender, then it might actually work. And I think maybe the Nordics is potentially a special. They're a special region because they like collaborating on quite a lot of things, and we've seen collaboration between them on things like orphans and biosimilars and so on in the past. So whether it's a model that other countries will adopt, that's yet to be seen. And maybe if it doesn't quite work out, then we might not see that later on. But yeah, you're right. There is a potential fighting fire with fire there.
Thank you, Aurelio.
Thanks.
We'll go to our next presentation from Victor. Victor will be presenting as well on sustainability.
Okay. Hello? Can you hear me? No. Hello? No? Good. Hello? No? It's not working. It's working? No. Not working. Did I do? Now it's good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So I work at Mylan. I'm responsible for policy and market access. So I put together a few slides just to show you some of the trends that we are working in Europe. What I would propose, Martin, if you agree, is that if there is something that you would like me to elaborate more, just interrupt as we go. Feel free to ask questions also in the middle of the presentation. So no need to wait for the end to ask your questions. And I think it's quite complementary to the information that was also shared by IQVIA about the price trends and also about the sustainability of the industry. And I would like to share with you some ideas and see if we can also work together to create a more sustainable market. I would just start with a very brief presentation about Mylan globally. What I want to highlight is mainly, it's a huge workforce, so above 35,000, 47 manufacturing facilities, and I would like to highlight also this number, 69 billion doses. just to show that there is a lot of complexity. It's not that Mylan is special or different from other big players that are there, but when we are talking about these big pharmaceutical companies, especially on the generic side, there is a lot of complexity that needs to be managed along the supply chain, even before manufacturing, but the manufacturing piece and also the supply chain, the deliver, and all the elements. This is the picture in Europe as we have it today. Also, we have 15 manufacturing sites that are based in Europe, also an important contribution. And one element that might make Mylan a little bit special is that our business is divided in 30% generics, 30% OTC, and 30%, around 30%, also prescription products. So 5 years ago, we were 100% generic company, and then through the acquisition of Abbott established products division, and then followed by the acquisition of Meda, our business was completely transformed, and now it's a split between these three business areas. So, of course, this gives us a view of all the different markets and how they are organized, but also creates a lot of challenges on how to manage the business and the price and reimbursement rules in each country. So that's on Mylan. Maybe for some of you that are not in Europe or do not work in Europe, just to show that one, the population is increasing, but even more importantly, I would say that life expectancy is increasing dramatically. So the people that are born today will live more than 100 years. But in Europe, out of the 20 oldest countries in the world, Europe has 18. So it's a very old population in Europe, and the problem that this creates is that there will be less people working for the ones that are not working. And of course this has an impact in terms of sustainability of the healthcare system and of the social model that we have in Europe. Also, there are two dynamics that are very clear in Europe. One, I think you are aware, that has to do with the Brexit, which might or not happen. We will have to wait and see. But so far, it looks like it's going to happen at the end of March. And what this already triggered during this period is that all the market authorizations that were based in the UK need to be moved to Europe. So there are a lot of regulatory activities to change these products, the batch releases, all the regulatory activities need to be based now in a European country. As you can imagine, there is for companies with a huge portfolio, in our case we have around 20,000 SKUs, many of them UK was the reference member state, and now this requires a lot of regulatory work of all the companies, but also of the regulators. So additional cost with no clear benefit for anyone. Also next year we will have the European elections for the European Parliament, and then followed by the election of the European Commission. And of course we see that there are, in Europe, it's raising the anti-Europe movement. So many countries or political parties that do not support the integration in Europe, and that they are against a more unified Europe. So one more element of tension between countries, and at the political level that also creates uncertainty for the business. And one additional trend has to do with the refugees and people leaving and running away from war scenarios and coming to Europe, bringing new cultures, new diseases, increased access that is needed from the health structures to support these populations that are coming. So this will all have an impact in the system and creates pressure, of course, on the healthcare budgets. So it's very difficult for the payers to cope with these dynamics, and also for the pharmaceutical industry. And here you see 4 examples of regulation that is coming from the European Commission that will have a significant impact in the upcoming years. So I will start with the pharmaceuticals in the environment. The European Commission is really focused on regulating everything that has to do with the environment, manufacturing, wastage of the factories, water residues, how do companies manufacturing dispose of their residues. So we can expect that this will increase in Europe. There is already, of course, regulation impacting this, but this will increase, and it will impact not only Europe, but also manufacturing outside Europe of medicines that later on will be sold in Europe. One other element that we are right in the middle of this fight is the Falsified Medicines Directive. In many countries and geographies you have serialization, track and trace, many different names. We are implementing this Falsified Medicines Directive in Europe today. The deadline is February 9, and we are not ready. No one is ready. So this is a massive system that has to do with guaranteeing that the medicines that are in the official supply chain are not falsified. It has to do with hospitals, with pharmacies, with wholesalers, pharmaceutical industry, third-party manufacturers, logistic partners, retail pharmacies. Everyone is involved. Everyone needs to establish a system to be able to read the barcodes and decommission the product. So it's a massive system that is spread out to all European countries. And of course, this increases the cost of doing business. And one of the negative impacts that we already experience at Mylan, and we also see in other companies, is also the reduction of the portfolio. So companies doing their analysis and to support changes in the artworks, regulatory changes, include the serialization and sell the product with prices that sometimes are of €1. It's not worthwhile, so companies are also reducing that portfolios due to the implementation of the Falsified Medicines Directive. We have a new directive it's not new, already 3 years old, from the European Commission, but it's in the process of being implemented, that incentivizes public entities to buy not exclusively on price, so to use other criteria than price. We've seen these movements like the Nordic movement, but the tender systems in many countries in Europe that are 100% based on price. They are designed to lower the price as much as possible, and with this directive the European Commission tries to include other criteria that could be, for instance, pharmaceuticals in the environment, or reliability of supply, or any others, into these public procurement systems. And finally, the lack of the SPC waiver. So the SPC waiver is that in Europe, companies are not able to produce, to export, or to sell on day one after patent expire if the SPC, the supplementary product certificate, is valid. So it's not to commercialize, it's just being able to produce and stockpile to export to other countries where the patent is already elapsed, or to sell in Europe after day one. This is not allowed in Europe. So what happens is that a lot of the production moves outside Europe, and then on day one, the planes come with the products to be able to sell when the patent expires, or the boats, or the trucks, or whatever. So we are working quite a lot with Medicines for Europe on this topic. We have a very intense discussion going on at the European Parliament level, where we try to create this change in the legislation that would allow European-based companies to produce in Europe, to sell on day one after patent expire, and also to export. So these are some of the things that I think will have a huge impact in the upcoming years on the pharmaceutical industry. And on top of that, there is all these elements that have to do with, let's say, with the day-to-day regulatory activities that are increasing in terms of costs to the company. Increase of the fees, variations, and so on. So the regulatory agencies in Europe, although they work as a network, they are not fully harmonized, creating huge regulatory burdens, especially for the companies with large portfolios. One final element that I think is contributing to the unsustainable environment, and it was already mentioned in the previous presentation, has to do with the high-priced medicines, the orphan medicines. We see that today around 15%, I think this is the number that I have, around 50% of the growth on the expense comes from new medicines. Very important life-saving medicines that patients need them, but it becomes very, very difficult for payers to pay medicines that completely disrupt the healthcare systems, like the most famous case is Sovaldi, but there are many when we are talking about therapies that cost 100,000, 200,000 per patient, affecting large portions of the population. This will have a significant impact, and we need to find the money to pay for this. The healthcare systems need to find a way. And of course, one of the solutions is using more generics, using more biosimilars. This helps to create to reduce the burden, offering 50, 60, 70% discount. This is part of the solution. But also what many times happen in Europe is that the authorities also include these price cuts every time, also on the off-patent, highly competitive market. So what happens is that we are squeezed in the middle between the increasing cost of the regulatory environment and the price decreases and the price cuts and so on, creating a very difficult situation for the pharmaceutical industry in terms of sustainability. But okay, it's not all that bad, let's say, so there are solutions, and there are some things where maybe we can also discuss if it makes sense to do some of those. So I will start with this one that has to do with improving the regulatory efficiency. And here, for instance, multi-country packs, not multi-country tender, but facilitating European producers to sell with the same pack in other countries, having a more harmonized pack sizes, or allowing export from the market authorization holders to other countries, or for instance solutions as simple as e-leaflets, which could save a lot of money to the pharmaceutical industry, would create a lot of value to the patient, and it's not yet implemented in Europe. So this is one element that could bring some cost savings. Market predictability and sustainability. So one, price and reimbursement rules, avoiding price cuts in the off-patent market, highly competitive market. But one of the things is also sustainable number of competitors in the market. Because, and maybe you can also comment on this topic, because what we see is that having one or two competitors, it's of course not good for the payer in the perspective of driving the savings, but also when we have a huge amount of players on the same molecule, what happens is that these prices go to a level that is below cost of goods. So many times when we speak with governments and they say, and we explain to them, this is not sustainable the way that the market is organized, and they tell me, it's your fault. It's your company and the other companies that are reducing the prices. What do you want me to do? You are the ones on the tenders offering these low prices. Because the pressure is very high, there are many, many, many competitors there, and sometimes companies, they are faced with huge stocks, or they have a huge volume capacity, and they just put the product in the market. So I would also say that having competition is good. Our business is all about competition, but it has to be a sustainable competition, molecule by molecule, market by market. There are other issues, for instance, like the penalties that are not proportional. Countries like Germany, where non-supply might have serious liabilities and creates a risk in terms of doing business in these countries. Addressing negative impact of parallel trade. So parallel trade is allowed and legislated in Europe, and it's a business that happens in Europe. But what we see is that more countries are taking action to prevent parallel trade, especially for life-saving medicines or medicines where the access is difficult. So we need to be mindful of that. Parallel trade is fine, but at the same time it should not lead to shortages and the lack of availability of medicines in one country. And of course, this is what happens when you have a country with very low price and countries with higher price. The countries with the lower price will end up with significant shortages, with no products, either because the pharmaceutical companies, when they need to prioritize the stock, will most likely sell in the high-price medicines, but also the parallel trades buy it where it's cheap and sell it where it's low. And we have multiple examples in Romania where we have an ongoing list of 600 medicines that are constantly out of stock. In some regions in Spain, like in Andalusia, where there are always constant out of stocks, or in Portugal in the hospital sector, or in Bulgaria, in many, many countries, we see that this topic about the shortage is increasing and has to do also with the price dynamics and the systems that were created. So I fully agree with Martin when he says that this joint procurement initiative, actually it's a mechanism that usually drives shortages, not the other way around. And on the information, I think that we as an industry, all of us together with the regulators, with the payers, with the pharmaceutical industry, all the payers, we do a terrible job managing the information. We don't have any idea about the products that are on the market. Our own products, we don't know what is the stock that it's available in the market. How can we do a good job in managing the availability of products in each country if we don't know the product that is available in the supply chain? There are commercial issues, confidential issues there, but as we are building the falsified medicine system, this should provide at least the basis for a better dialogue in terms of addressing the shortages problem, in terms of helping the partners in the supply chain to manage better the availability of products in each country. So I think there is still room for growth in many countries. In CE, I would say that populations are not enjoying the same level of access to medicines as in other parts of Europe, so there is room for increasing access there. There is room for increasing access in almost all the countries, especially to biological treatments with the biosimilars coming to market, and we are just almost reaching the 16th of October famous date for the expire of adalimumab. So there is room for growth, but I think that the key message is that we need to work together to make this happen. So I would leave it at that. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Can I ask the panel to take seats back, please? If there's any questions for Victor, please go ahead. Let's keep it to one or two questions because we have another panelist as well who wants to give a little bit of a speech.
Good morning and welcome to Spain. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for to invite us at this meeting. I apologize for my presentation. My presentation is not in PowerPoint, but the organizers tell me that it's not necessary because this will be a debate. Anyway, I would like only in 10 minutes to translate to a summary of about what is the situation of generics now in Spain. I represent a general manager at the National Association of Generics in Spain. There is an important fact. 20 years ago, arrived the first generic here in our country. Then I have now a history of 20 years. How is the main notice about this period, about these 20 years? One of them has an industrial sector. Nowadays, the generics industry in Spain is committed with deployment. We employed 9,000 job direct and 26,000 in indirect way. We are committed with the production. 7 each 10 of the generic are consumed in Spain are produced in our country. This is a very important figure in an industrial point of view. The third one is how is the investment in innovation and development. We employ the 3.5% of the total bill to increase the innovation add value in the large generics that is in the market. And the other important point for industry in Spain is the exportation. We have more or less now 30% of the exportation of the total amount. In summary, we can say that in Spain, the generics market is a Spanish market, very, very committed with the GDP product. I think that is a very good news for the interest of other countries in order to invest in Spain, because it's a good opportunity for this field in the industrial point of view. On the other hand, we in Spain, in our association, we represent the 95% of the total amount of generics products. In definitive, we have all generics company. And in the point of view of how is the situation in the market, in the Spanish market with the generics. We have nowadays 40% of market share in units. It is still far away of the average in Europe, that, as you know, is 65%. I have 21% in values. How is the situation? Why this situation is now in Spain? In our opinion, of course, years ago, Spain was a country that where the generics was the last arrive in our country. But nowadays, we think that the administration, the general administration and the local administration, because as you know, in Spain we have 17 different regions, and it's very important this aspect. In our opinion, the actual administration maybe is focused his effort in the cost of the pharmaceutical product in hospital that increase month by month. It's focused his attention in the biosimilar product that is coming now with very interest for administration. It's very focused in the financial of the innovative product because it's are very, very expensive, and maybe include to the orphan drugs, no? And maybe the generics after 20 years it's easy for the administration to think that the generic is here and of course reduce the cost of the pharmaceutical product and to maintain the assets. This is more or less the situation. In this one, we think that one very clear the mission of the generics in Spain. No, of course, we have the authentic price regulator of the price of the generics in the market. Of course, we ensured the patient access. Only one example, for instance, no, with the cost of one patient 15 years ago with simvastatin, nowadays, we can treat 23 patients. I think that is a very clear, no, element for to analyze the value of the generics in an access point of view. Of course, we contribute to the sustainability, the care of the health system through a positive budget impact. And anyway, in summary, we are very positive contributor to the GDP in Spain. But in other aspect, what are the threats to the generics? Well, I think that it's a threat for us that the administration think that the generic is only a weapon in order to reduce the price of the brand that expired the patent from the first day. I think that is a threat, no? The other one is very important in Spain, because Spain is the only country in Europe that it's mandatory that with the brand that expired the patent to equalize the price with the generics from the first day in the market. It's crazy. This is crazy, but this is because the administration maybe thinks that, oh, it's not depend on me. It's same for me, generics or brand. The important for me is low cost. No? And I think that it's very important to fight against this situation in Spain. And of course, the three one is, as you know, in Spain we have 17 different regions, no? The community autonomous. And it's very important to maintain a market unit, no? In order to apply the different rules in Spain. For example, Victor explained before about the tendering. No? It's real that the tendering is a real situation only in an area of Spain, in Andalusia. Andalusia is more or less the 20% of the total market. The good news is as now with the tendering is not good, and is not to appear in other countries in Europe. The tendering is not appear in other countries and other regions in Spain, only appear in Andalusia. In my opinion, by a politician, in a politician point of view, is a politician situation, but this is other discussion, no? But we need, as association, we need to maintain a unique criterion in order to apply the rules in the same direction for all countries, no? Only and to finalize, no, because I think that is the previous presentation for Aurelio and Vito are very, very, very descriptive, no, of the general market, and I would like only to put, no, the accent in the Spanish situation, no. Well, about it is what is the proposal that the National Association are working out with administration, with the central administration and local administration? Well, the first one is to ensure the generic as the real regulator of the price in the short and long term. We think that it's very important that the administration show this in the medium and long term, not only in short term, because it's not interesting, no? Of course, we need to recover the difference of the price between the brand and the generics, because it's necessary for us to maintain at least 1 year previous to introduce the generics in the homogeneous group, no, the reference price system. We need to maintain at least 1 year before it, because it's the way to increase our market share in the market, no? In the other word, in Spain, by law, it's mandatory to prescribe for products, pharmaceutical products out of patents. It's mandatory to prescribe by INM. This aspect is very important for us, because one idea in the mind that there is a relationship between INN prescription and generics product. And this aspect is good in Spain, but the bad news is that the introduction of the INN prescription by regions is not in the same way, because are different penetration. For then, our second goal is to increase the INN prescription in Spain for generics. And the third one is, of course, is to the suspension, no, of the autonomic standarding in Andalusian rules in order to obtain the sustainability and a governance and central administration. Anyway, this is only, I think that we are in time. It's only a summary. I would like to enjoy this conference and these days in Spain, and of course, to enjoy Madrid. Thank you.
Luis. Let me just first ask if there are any questions from the audience before we start the discussion.
Questions?
So thank you very much, Luis, about your presentation. Just wait till our microphone is working. Thank you. Thank you. So on Aurelio's slide, you showed at a certain moment the efficiency of the generic sector, and we saw that for Spain there was no headroom anymore for efficiency. Can it be that this is related to the fact that there is no price differentiation in the Spanish market between the originator product and the generic medicine? And then, second question to Angel Luis: when can we expect something to happen on this price differentiation?
Yeah. Are we going to use the mic? Okay. Is my mic on? Okay. Sorry, I can't hear.
Yeah, that's right.
Just you. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, you know, when we look at the pure numbers, we see that there is work to be done by countries like Spain in terms of bringing in the total volume of medicines that are used from a generics perspective up a little bit more, because we see that, you know, and I don't have the slides up here, but the numbers that are below the sort of the 80% that we're starting to see in Germany and the UK and the US, for example, you know, if those countries can operate at that level of generic utilization, then there's no fundamental reason why other countries can't. So, but you know, I'm not an expert on the Spanish market, so I think it's probably up to you to tell us what I guess, you know, the quick wins. What quick wins or what big uptake barriers do we have to bringing in generic usage a lot more here in Spain?
Yeah. Well, I think that in Spain the situation changed year by year, because years ago we have a reasonable rules, no, in order to promote the increase of generics. For example, the price between a brand generic that with patent expired and generics is years ago is not the same. The goal is very easy. For example, if the doctor prescribe a brand, no, okay, you can, the administration pay for it at the same level of the generic brand, and the difference will be paid by the patient, no? This situation is applied in other countries, but this rule applied in Spain years ago. But nowadays, the actual administration no consider this situation only because think that maybe if you dispense generics for patient and if for brand you pay a difference in money, in his mind thinks that there is two health, one health for rich people and one health for poor people. It's incredible, because we have now the average price of the generics is more or less 2 euros, no? But this is the situation. For this reason, it's very important for us to recover the price difference price concept, no? Because it's necessary in order to define the concept of generics. The other hand, this is in relationships, of course, with the time that you spend between you are in the market with a new generics and the time when you are introducing the pre-reference system group, no?
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try kind of a provocative question and see what the panel says, and then maybe if the audience can jump in as well. So, Aurelio, you showed on your slide you have the biggest wholesalers in the US. There are 3 of them, and the 3 of them have a lot of buying power in the US. Then you showed as well that in Europe we are today with around 208 companies that are supplying products on the market. Do they have sufficient buying power, or are there just too many companies at the moment on the market? Question for everybody. Maybe Victor first.
Yeah. Hello? Is it working? Okay. So I guess we can see one trend that has to do with the consolidation of the distribution. Wholesalers in Europe acquiring each other and becoming bigger. At the same time integrating with the pharmacies. So creating a leaner distribution model. Of course, that European system is still very much based on the pharmacy and proximity of the pharmacy, but this integration between wholesalers and pharmacy is visible. I would also say that with the technologies that are available today, home deliver, home care, capacity of people to buy online, to get a prescription online, I would say that in the next 5-6 years, we will see a huge change in the distribution model in Europe, especially based on a more technological approach and more oriented to the patient and to the patient at his place, in his home.
Any of you want to comment?
So, just touching on that point, I mean, I think we are also seeing a lot of non-traditional distributors entering the systems, and that's really starting in the US, but there's no reason why it won't sort of come over to Europe next. You know, huge players like Amazon, Walmart, that have a lot of capital behind them, so they're able to actually put a ton of resource behind them. They already have certain distribution models out there for retail products, and now it's about them trying to solve how do we get the sort of pharmacy side into that. And you know, we over the last sort of couple of years, Amazon's made a few purchases for other companies that are specifically in bringing out sort of these retail pharmaceutical products to patients. And you know, we can easily say, and like you said, you know, I think maybe close to 5-10 years, because they still have problems with market access and navigating the whole system. But that's going to create a shift in the power of who's actually distributing these medicines. Yeah, I agree.
Are there any burning questions from the audience still left? Then, because of sake of time, I think we're running a little bit over time. Just want to make one concluding statement, let's say. So I think what we were just mentioning at the end is that we're trying to bring more value to patients, right? By having new distribution models, home delivery, more home care, more patient-centered care. And what Victor has been showing is that in his presentation, that companies are taking a lot of responsibilities in dealing with Brexit, in implementing FMD, in putting in place environmental aspects. Or really showed as well in his presentation that, and actually Luis mentioned it as well. When a product goes off patent, we see that we, as generic business, we are treating twice as many patients, while the cost impact is even lower than before the product went on patent. I think what we are trying to do now as Medicines for Europe is really advocate to payers that they also need to take some responsibility in showing that there is a value in what we do for patients, and that cost containment is not just the driver of prices. So I would like to thank the panel and thank you as audience as well, and enjoy the rest of the exhibition and of CPHI. Thank you.